What do we do with a monument that seems to arrive from another chapter of time? Not a ruin in the ordinary sense, not merely a broken wall or weathered stair, but a work so exact, so deliberate, that it unsettles the stories we tell about ourselves. History likes straight lines. It prefers progress to move in clear steps, from simple tools to complex machines, from myth to measurement. And yet, across deserts, mountains, jungles, and forgotten plateaus, there are places where that neat sequence begins to blur. A stone cut too precisely, a temple aligned too perfectly, a tunnel sloping with impossible control beneath the earth, a circle of ancient markers that appears to listen to the sky. None of these sites speaks in plain language. They offer no easy confession. Instead, they remain where they have always been, under sun and wind, carrying their silence like a form of memory. Perhaps that is why they affect us so deeply. They do not merely ask how something was built. They ask what kind of mind imagined it, what kind of patience, observation, and devotion could shape matter on such a scale and leave behind so little explanation. The mystery is not only technical, it is human. Somewhere in the distant Pampa, people looked at stone, water, shadow, and stars and saw possibilities we struggle to reconstruct. This is not a journey into certainty. It is a walk along the edge of what can be known, where archaeology meets imagination, and where evidence sometimes opens into wonder rather than closure. We will move through 10 extraordinary places, each rooted in real landscapes, real materials, real human effort. And with each one, the same question will quietly return. When we stand before the works of the past, are we uncovering lost answers or discovering how much of ourselves has been forgotten? What if the oldest form of intelligence was not written in books, but carved into the horizon? The first light of morning arrives slowly over the Salisbury Plain. Mist hangs close to the ground, and the grass holds the cold of the night. Then the sun lifts, and for a brief moment, the stones of Stonehenge seem less like ruins than instruments. Upright masses of sarsen and bluestone placed with a composure that still feels intentional. Even now, after centuries of study, they do not look accidental. They look as if they are waiting for something. We know enough to admire the achievement, and not enough to dissolve its power. Many of the stones traveled astonishing distances. Some came from nearby, but others were carried from the hills of Wales, over land and possibly water, by people without engines, cranes, or steel. The monument changed over generations. It was not built in a single burst of genius, but through repeated acts of labor, planning, and belief. That may be the most moving detail of all. This place was made by many hands across many lifetimes, as though the future itself had been included in the design. Its alignments have inspired both careful science and extravagant interpretation. At summer solstice, the rising sun still meets the monument in a way that feels too exact to ignore. Whether Stonehenge was a ceremonial center, a calendar, a burial landscape, or all of these at once, it reveals a people deeply attentive to cycles larger than themselves. They watch the sky not as spectators, but as participants. Time was not abstract. It arrived in light, shadow, season, and stone. And that may be why Stonehenge continues to speak so clearly in an age of screens and satellites. It reminds us that knowledge once required patience. It required standing still long enough to notice repetition, long enough to trust that the heavens could be read. The monument does not offer a final answer. It offers a posture, humility before the world, and the quiet conviction that meaning can be built from observation. Perhaps the real mystery is not how they moved the stones, but how they learned to see so far with so little. How does a city survive when the people who built it are gone and only the mountain remembers their names? High in the Peruvian Andes, where clouds drift low enough to touch the ridgelines, Machu Picchu appears almost by surprise. Terraces cling to the slopes, stone walls emerge from the green as if they had grown there. The entire site seems suspended between earth and sky, balanced on a knife edge of geology and intention. It is beautiful in the way certain truths are beautiful, quietly, without needing to explain themselves. The Inca did not leave us an alphabet in the conventional sense, yet they left something equally persuasive: design. The stones of Machu Picchu fit so closely that a blade can scarcely find space between them. Doors tilt inward with measured grace. Water channels run with an elegance that suggests not only utility but respect for the landscape. This was no careless settlement improvised against a mountain. It was a conversation with the mountain, shaped by people who understood slope, rainfall, fault lines, and sunlight with astonishing intimacy. For generations, outsiders romanticized the site as a lost city, as though it had vanished from memory entirely. But places like this are rarely lost in the way we imagine. More often they are overlooked, or misunderstood, or hidden by the limits of the stories told about them. Machu Picchu was never simply a mystery waiting for modern discovery. It was part of a living world, connected to roads, rituals, labor systems, and a civilization that knew how to build in dialogue with extremes. What still humbles us is the precision. These stones were not set in a landscape that welcomes error. Earthquakes move through this region. Rain can undo weak planning. Time tests every assumption. Yet the city endures, not because it defied nature, but because it listened to it. The architecture bends where it must, drains where it must, holds where it must. Intelligence here was not domination. It was adaptation refined into beauty. And perhaps that is why Machu Picchu feels so modern, even now. It suggests a forgotten standard of wisdom, that progress is not always measured by how much we impose on the world, but by how carefully we learn its terms. In the end, the mountain did keep the city, but it also preserved a question worth carrying forward. What might our own creations become if we built them not against the earth, but with it? Can stone remember the pressure of a vanished empire? At dawn in the Lebanese Bekaa Valley, the columns of Baalbek catch the sun before the town below fully wakes. They rise from the earth with a scale that seems almost unreasonable, as if architecture had briefly stepped beyond ordinary human proportion. Even in ruin, the place feels excessive in the most deliberate way. It was meant to impress, to humble, to place the individual beneath something vast. State, cosmos, divinity, or all three at once. The Romans built here on foundations older than Rome's own grandest ambitions, and what remains still unsettles engineers and historians alike. Some of the stones in the platform beneath the Temple of Jupiter are among the largest ever quarried and moved in the ancient world. Their size alone invites speculation, but speculation is only the beginning. The deeper wonder lies in organization, the planning, the labor, the geometry, the confidence required to turn raw mass into a coherent, sacred landscape. To stand at Baalbek is to encounter a civilization thinking at monumental scale. This was not only construction, it was choreography. Stone had to be cut, transported, aligned, raised, and integrated into a design that balanced symbolism with structural intelligence. Every block suggests not miracle but mastery. And yet mastery itself can feel miraculous when the methods are partly obscured by time. It is tempting to treat such places as puzzles to be solved once and for all, to reduce them to measurements and logistics. Those things matter. They bring us closer to the people who worked here, the hands that shaped the edges, the bodies that strained under command and heat. But explanation does not diminish awe. If anything, it deepens it. Because the more clearly we see the human effort involved, the more astonishing the result becomes. Baalbek reminds us that history is not made only of ideas. It is made of weight, of materials gathered and ordered, of collective belief translated into stone so large it seems to challenge memory itself. Empires fall, names fade. Yet sometimes the record of ambition remains under open sky, asking not whether humans were capable of greatness, but what kind of greatness they chose to pursue. And that question lingers long after the columns fall back into silence. What kind of civilization cuts a mountain not to conquer it, but to hollow out a sanctuary inside the living rock? In central India, the basalt cliffs of Ellora stretch in a long, dark line, weathered by centuries of monsoon rain and burning sun. At first glance, the caves seem improbable enough. Temples, halls, and monasteries carved directly into stone with patience bordering on devotion. But then the Kailasa temple comes into view, and the mind hesitates. It does not feel built. It feels revealed, as though someone had seen a hidden structure sleeping inside the mountain and slowly set it free. Unlike architecture assembled piece by piece, Kailasa was cut from the top downward. Stone was removed, not stacked. Workers began above and carved their way into emptiness, creating courtyards, columns, stairways, shrines, and sculpted walls from a single mass of rock. The scale is staggering, but the method is even more humbling. One mistake could not be concealed. There was no second block to replace the first. Precision here was irreversible, and yet the result is not cold perfection. It breathes with myth, movement, and human intention. Elephants seem to bear the weight of the temple. Panels ripple with vows, journeys, battles, and cosmic order. Every surface suggests that engineering and imagination were never separate disciplines. To carve a place like this required geometry, planning, and relentless labor. But it also required a worldview in which stone itself could become story. What survives at Ellora is more than technical brilliance. It is evidence of coexistence. Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain monuments stand within the same complex, not as a simple symbol of harmony, but as a record of centuries in which cultures, beliefs, and artistic traditions shared space and influence. The mountain became an archive of spiritual thought, shaped by different hands across time. Kailasa reminds us that mastery is sometimes subtractive. The artist removes. The builder listens. Meaning emerges through what is taken away. In an age obsessed with accumulation, there is something quietly radical in that idea. To create by cutting back. To discover form by honoring what already exists. Perhaps that is why the temple still feels alive. It suggests that the deepest human achievements are not always those that rise highest, but those that uncover what was hidden within the world all along. Petra is carved into stone, yet it depended on delicate knowledge of roots, seasons, trade, and trust. When those networks shifted, the city's central role faded. What remains is a shell, but a shell that still carries the shape of a vanished world. And maybe that is why Petra continues to move us. It reminds us that civilization is never only walls and monuments. How do you build for eternity in a world made of surviving blood and forgetting? On the Giza Plateau, the desert light has a way of flattening distance. The pyramids seem nearer than they are, simpler than they are, as if their geometry could be understood in a single glance. But the closer one comes, the more the illusion breaks apart. Each stone has weight, each angle carries intention. What looked from afar like pure shape becomes, up close, the record of countless decisions made by human hands under an unforgiving sky. For generations, these monuments have been treated as symbols before they are treated as works of labor. They have inspired admiration, fantasy, scholarship, and endless projection. Yet stripped of exaggeration, their reality remains extraordinary. The Great Pyramid was built with a precision that still commands respect. Its alignment to the cardinal directions is remarkably exact. Its internal passages and chambers reveal not only ritual ambition, but advanced planning, surveying, and a disciplined understanding of materials. Whatever else the pyramids were, they were acts of organized intelligence on a national scale. It matters, too, that they were not the products of magic or mystery in the cheap sense. They were built by people, skilled workers, planners, quarrymen, haulers, artisans, living within a society capable of coordinating effort across seasons and generations. That fact does not reduce their grandeur. It restores it. The pyramids become more powerful, not less, when we recognize them as evidence of human capability rather than escape into legend. And yet there is still something unsettling about them. They were tombs, but also declarations. They spoke of kingship, divine order, and continuity beyond death. They transformed grief and power into geometry, as if the most stable shape might hold back chaos itself. In that sense, the pyramids are not only Egyptian, they are deeply human. Again and again, cultures have tried to answer mortality with permanence. The wind moves differently around the stones now. Empires have risen and vanished. Languages have changed. The beliefs that animated these structures no longer govern the world around them. But the pyramids remain, asking a question more enduring than any dynasty. When we build to outlast ourselves, are we preserving meaning or only leaving behind the shape of our desire to be remembered? What happens when an entire landscape becomes a language for the sky? On the dry coastal plain of southern Peru, the earth appears almost empty at first. Rust-colored ground stretches outward under a hard blue sky, broken only by distant hills and the hush of wind. But from above, the emptiness begins to speak. A hummingbird unfurls across the desert. A spider extends its long, delicate legs. Straight lines run for miles, crossing the plateau with a confidence that feels both mathematical and ceremonial. The Nazca lines do not rise like monuments. They reveal themselves only when distance changes the eye. That may be part of their enduring power. These vast geoglyphs were made by removing the dark surface stones to expose the lighter earth beneath, a method almost simple in concept and astonishing in effect. The makers did not need to move mountains. They needed patience, planning, and a clear understanding of scale to create figures best appreciated from above without ever seeing them from the air required something remarkable, a mind able to imagine the whole while standing inside only a fragment. For years, the lines invited fantasies because they seemed to exceed common sense. But the true story is more human and perhaps more profound. Archaeologists increasingly view them not as isolated curiosities, but as part of a ritual landscape connected to water, movement, and belief. In one of the driest places on Earth, survival depended on fragile cycles of rain and fertility. The desert was not empty at all. It was charged with need, memory, and attention. The lines may have marked pathways, ceremonies, or offerings directed toward forces beyond human control. There is beauty in that possibility. These images were not hidden. They were placed in openness, under sun and silence, where the land itself could become a form of prayer. They suggest a culture willing to think beyond immediate utility, to inscribe meaning on a scale large enough to bind community, environment, and the unseen. And perhaps that is why the Nazca lines continue to stir the imagination. They remind us that not all intelligence leaves behind machines or texts. Some of it takes the form of pattern. Some of it lives in orientation, in ritual, in the courage to draw something vast that may only be fully understood by a different perspective. How much of human wisdom, even now, remains invisible until we learn how to look from higher ground? What if the most precise machine of the ancient world, small enough to disappear in a shipwreck, it rested for centuries beneath the Mediterranean, hidden in darkness among broken statues, amphorae, in the slow work of salt? Then, in the early 20th century, sponge divers off the Greek island of Antikythera brought fragments to the surface, corroded lumps of bronze and wood that did not look like much at first. But inside that ruin was a structure so intricate, so unexpectedly sophisticated, that it forced historians to widen their sense of what the ancient mind could do. The Antikythera mechanism is often described as an ancient computer, and while the phrase can oversimplify, it captures the shock of the object. Gears interlocked with mathematical purpose. Dials track celestial cycles. The device seems to have modeled the movements of the sun, the moon, perhaps even planets, and may have helped predict eclipses and mark calendrical events. This was not a decorative curiosity. It was a compact instrument of thought, a machine built to translate the heavens into motion a person could hold in the hand. Its existence changes more than one timeline. We tend to imagine technology advancing in a steady procession, each era handing improved tools to the next. But the mechanism suggests something less tidy. Knowledge can surge, disappear, scatter, and wait centuries to be recognized. Entire traditions of craftsmanship may flourish and then fade, leaving behind only fragments that seem, when rediscovered, almost out of place in their own age. That is part of what makes the device so moving. It is not only proof of technical brilliance, it is proof of vulnerability. Someone designed it, someone cut those gears with astonishing care. Someone understood ratios, cycles, and the stubborn elegance of bronze teeth turning in sequence. And yet, the broader world that made such a thing did not preserve it in abundance. History kept only shards. In that sense, the Antikythera mechanism is more than an artifact. It is a message about the fragility of human achievement. We do not lose knowledge only through ignorance. We lose it through disaster, neglect, war, shifting values, and the ordinary erosion of time. What survives is never the whole of what once was. And so this small machine, rescued from the sea, leaves us with a large and uncomfortable question. How much of our understanding of the past is shaped not by what humanity achieved, but by what chance allowed to remain? Why would a civilization carve an entire world beneath the ground and trust darkness to keep it safe? In central Turkey, the land around Cappadocia rolls in soft folds of volcanic stone, beautiful and exposed beneath the open sky. But below that gentle landscape lies another architecture altogether. Derinkuyu descends level after level into the earth. Rooms, corridors, storage spaces, ventilation shafts, wells, stables, gathering areas. An underground city vast enough to shelter whole communities. It does not overwhelm by height or ornament. It overwhelms by intention. Someone imagined refuge not as a wall, but as depth. To enter such a place is to feel the instinct for survival made physical. The passage is narrow. Air cools. Light fades. What first seems improvised gradually reveals order. Stone doors could be rolled into place to seal corridors. Ventilation was engineered with extraordinary care. Life below ground was not comfortable in the modern sense, but it was possible, and that possibility mattered. Derinkuyu was not merely dug. It was designed around a recurring human truth. Safety is sometimes found by becoming invisible. Scholars continue to debate the full history of these subterranean complexes, who began them, how they evolved, and how different populations adapted them over time. That uncertainty is part of their fascination. Places like Derinkuyu were not static monuments. They were living systems, revised and reused as danger changed shape, invasion, instability, persecution, harsh climate. Whatever the immediate cause, the city below suggests a culture that learned how to endure by preparing for interruption. There is something deeply moving in that. Many ancient structures express confidence, triumph, power displayed under the sun. Derinkuyu speaks another language entirely. It is about caution, continuity, and the determination to protect ordinary life. Families would have cooked here, prayed here, waited here, tried to keep fear from spreading in the close air. The engineering is impressive, but the emotional reality is even more so. This was architecture built around vulnerability, and maybe that is why it still feels contemporary. Beneath all our technologies and institutions, the oldest human question remains unchanged. Where do we go when the world above becomes uncertain? Derinkuyu does not answer with grandeur. It answers with foresight, cooperation, and the quiet discipline of making shelter where none seems possible. In the end, the underground city reminds us that resilience is not always visible. Sometimes the most sophisticated thing a society can build is not a monument to power, but a hidden space in which life can continue. What kind of knowledge is hidden in plain sight, waiting not to be uncovered, but properly understood? Deep in the green lowlands of Cambodia, where roots grip stone and the air carries the weight of rain, Angkor Wat rises from the forest with improbable symmetry. At first, it seems almost dreamlike, its towers reflected in still water, its galleries unfolding with measured calm. But the longer one looks, the more the temple complex changes shape. It is not simply a monument. It is a map of belief, a feat of engineering, and a record of a society that understood water, stone, and symbolism as parts of one connected system. Built in the 12th century, Angkor Wat is often admired for its scale, and rightly so. The carvings alone seem endless. Battles, processions, celestial dancers, episodes of myth and kingship stretching across walls with astonishing discipline. Yet the temple's deeper genius may lie beyond ornament. It belongs to a vast hydraulic landscape of reservoirs, canals, moats, and managed flows that help sustain one of the great urban centers of the pre-modern world. The sacred and the practical were not separate realms here. Cosmology and infrastructure move together. That union can be difficult for modern eyes to hold. We are accustomed to dividing life into categories: religion, politics, engineering, art. Angkor resists those divisions. Its geometry speaks to the heavens, but its foundations speak to soil and water. Its towers evoke divine mountains, yet the city around it depended on careful environmental knowledge, seasonal adaptation, and labor organized on an immense scale. What appears at first as pure spiritual ambition was also a sophisticated response to landscape. And then there is the question of endurance. Why do some civilizations leave behind records that remain legible, while others fade into fragments and overgrowth? Angkor was never truly swallowed by the jungle in the romantic way legend suggests. It was transformed, reinterpreted, sustained in memory even as political centers shifted. But the complexity of the civilization that built it was for a long time flattened into image rather than understood as system. Perhaps that is the lesson Encore offers now. Greatness is rarely one thing. It is not only beauty, nor only power, nor only technical skill. It is the ability to weave different forms of knowledge into a living whole. And when such a whole becomes difficult to see, the loss is not just historical. It is imaginative. How many of our own achievements would seem mysterious in the future? Not because they were magical, but because the world that gave them meaning had disappeared. What if the most extraordinary architecture was created not by building upward, but by shaping absence itself? In the western Indian state of Gujarat, near the village of Patan, the earth opens in a series of descending lines so graceful they seem almost musical. At first, Rani Ki Vav appears to be a staircase disappearing into shadow. But step by step, landing by landing, it reveals a far more intricate vision, a monumental stepwell where engineering, sculpture, and reverence meet below ground level. It does not command the horizon like a fortress or temple tower. It invites descent, and in that descent, it changes the meaning of space. Built in the 11th century, the stepwell was designed to collect and preserve water in a region where water could never be taken for granted. But utility alone cannot explain its richness. Pillared pavilions line the route downward. Carved figures inhabit the walls in astonishing number and detail. The deeper one goes, the more the place feels like a threshold between worlds. Sunlight above, coolness below, daily life mingling with ritual imagination. Water was not merely stored here. It was honored, anticipated, and woven into architecture as both necessity and symbol. That is what makes places like Rani Ki Vav so arresting. They remind us that infrastructure can also be beautiful, and that beauty itself can be a form of respect. The builders understood hydraulics, load, erosion, and stone. They also understood something more difficult to measure, that communities gather differently around what sustains them when it is given dignity. A well can be hidden and functional. This one became a shared experience, a civic space, almost a journey inward. There is a tenderness in that idea. In many ancient monuments, we encounter power expressed through scale or permanence. Here, what is monumental is care. Care for water, for public life, for the spiritual imagination, for the rhythm of drought and relief. Even the act of walking downward toward the well seems to acknowledge dependence. No one stands above the need for water. Everyone must descend. And perhaps that is why the stepwell still feels quietly radical. It offers a model of intelligence rooted not in domination, but in stewardship. It suggests that the civilizations we admire most may be those that understood how to turn survival into culture and necessity into grace. When a society chooses to beautify the things it cannot live without, it reveals not only what it values, but how deeply it understands the fragility of life itself. What remains when the stone itself begins to speak in angles we still struggle to explain? On a high plain in the Andes, not far from Lake Titicaca, the air around Tiwanaku carries a particular clarity. Light falls hard there, shadows sharpen quickly. The land feels stripped down to essentials: sky, wind, earth, and rock. In that stark setting stand the remnants of a civilization that flourished long before the rise of the Inca, leaving behind gateways, terraces, sunken courts, and blocks cut with a precision that continues to provoke both admiration and restraint. The site does not need myth to feel mysterious. Its silence is enough. Among its most studied features are the finely worked stones of Pumapunku, where andesite blocks appear shaped with an exactness that feels startling even now. Their edges are clean. Their angles repeat with intention. Grooves and joints suggest design systems we only partly understand. None of this places the site outside human history. On the contrary, it pulls us deeper into it. The real question is not whether ancient people were capable of such work. It is why we remain so quick to underestimate the range of methods, patience, and intelligence they possessed. Tiwanaku emerged in a demanding environment, and like many of the world's great centers, its endurance depended on intimate knowledge of place. Agriculture here required adaptation to altitude, cold, and seasonal uncertainty. Social life required coordination, ritual, and shared vision. The monumental architecture did not rise in isolation from those realities. It was part of a larger world of ecological skill and political imagination. Stonework this exact was not merely decorative. It expressed order, perhaps sacred order, perhaps civic order, perhaps both made visible and durable. What humbles the modern observer is how incomplete the record remains. We can measure blocks, trace alignments, study tool marks, compare patterns, and still be left with a gap between evidence and experience. That gap invites speculation, but it also invites humility. Not every unanswered question is a void to be filled with fantasy. Sometimes it is a reminder that human complexity exceeds the stories later ages tell about earlier ones. And perhaps that is Tiwanaku's quiet gift. It asks us to reconsider the arrogance of chronological superiority. We inherit technologies the ancient world did not possess, but inheritance is not the same thing as wisdom. Precision, coordination, symbolic thought, environmental intelligence, these did not begin with us, and they will not end with us. In the clean Andean light, the stones seem to say something simple and difficult at once, that the past is not primitive. It is merely farther away than our imagination has learned to travel. What do these ancient places finally leave us with? Answers, or a more honest kind of wonder? By the end of such a journey, the monuments begin to speak to one another. A circle of stones on an English plain, a city in the clouds, a temple cut from a mountain, a desert of lines, a machine from the sea, a refuge beneath the earth. They were born in different centuries, under different skies, by people who did not share a language, a king, or a single idea of the sacred. And yet they are bound by something unmistakably human, the desire to shape the world with meaning. It is tempting to stand before these works and search for a final explanation that will settle everything. We want the method, the blueprint, the hidden technique that dissolves mystery into fact. Facts matter. Evidence matters. Careful interpretation is the most respectful way to meet the past. But even when the measurements are complete and the quarry routes mapped and the astronomical alignments tested, something remains. Not a supernatural secret, something more difficult and more intimate. The presence of minds we can never fully recover, though we can still feel their intention. That may be the truest legacy of these structures. They remind us that human beings have always been more than the era assigned to them. The past was never filled with simple people waiting for progress to rescue them. It was filled with observers, makers, mourners, believers, planners, laborers, and visionaries. People who studied wind and water, shadow and stone, and turned necessity into beauty, belief into geometry, fear into shelter, memory into form. And perhaps that is why these places still matter now. In an age of speed, they return us to patience. In an age of endless information, they return us to attention. They suggest that intelligence is not only invention, but relationship, the ability to listen deeply to materials, landscapes, seasons, and to one another. They also remind us how fragile knowledge can be, how easily whole worlds of understanding can fracture and fade. So the question is no longer whether ancient science can explain everything we see. The deeper question is what kind of future we might build if we learn to respect the lost brilliance behind us. Not as fantasy, not as nostalgia, but as a humbling truth. The stones endure. The names often do not. And somewhere between what survives and what is forgotten, we meet the oldest lesson of all, that to be human is to reach beyond one lifetime, leaving signs in the dark for those who come after us, and hoping they will look closely enough to understand.